Hey everyone. So today we're going to be looking at a video called Scavengers or Herbivores, Human Diet Explained. This is on Plant-Based News, I think is the name of the channel. And it's featuring this guy, Dr. Milton Mills. For those who don't know, Dr. Milton, a lot of the vegan diet gurus, the vegan doctors, are a little bit funny, like a little bit off and don't make sense all the time. But this one, I think, is particularly crazy. Let's see what he has to say today.
Look at the way human beings are actually constructed anatomically. And if you look at our physiology, we are truly strict herbivores.
So that is simply not the case. We know that our closest living relatives, chimps and bonobos, for example, are not purely herbivores, right? So what he's saying just doesn't make any sense. We also know that if we had the same dimensions as those in terms of not dimensions, but proportions, so if our gut was proportional to our brain size, the same way that we see in other primates, our gut would be 3 times its size, or our brain would be a third of its size, right? So we know something changed. We know that, and most people who study this believe that what changed is the proportion of animal foods in the diet. And as that has gone up, that's what's allowed our brain to grow. So in the first few seconds of this video, he's already talking nonsense. If I asked you what's the most important cell in the body, what would you say? Would you say the cardiac cell, the heart cell? Would you say the hepatic cell, the liver cell? Would you say some kind of immune cell? The answer, my friends, is none of these. The answer of the most important cell in the body is stem cells, because they can become any of those things and more. We are born producing stem cells, but unfortunately, as we age, our production of stem cells goes down. Fortunately, there is a way to increase our endogenous production of stem cells even as we get older. To find out more, click the link on your screen.
That's why when we depart from a strictly plant-based diet, we become ill. That's why.
So when you say things in universal, this is why I'm very careful on how I frame things in this channel. If you say things as universals, when you depart from a strictly plant-based diet, you become ill, then how do you explain like all the data in the world, right? Showing, even data that this guy likes to cite, on blue zones, et cetera, where those people are not eating strictly plant-based diets. Those people are eating lots and lots of meat, and they're thriving. They're the most thriving populations on the planet. How do you explain Hong Kong, which has the most meat consumption per capita of any place on Earth, and also has the longest life expectancy of any place on Earth, right? I only need one counterexample when he states it this categorically to disprove his claim. My advice to him, and frankly to all of us, it's not just him, we need to be very nuanced in how we state things, right? Because when you state things as universals, it's just so obviously untrue that it's like very easy to disprove.
Why diets that contain large amounts of animal food are associated with a number of chronic diseases, like
associated being the key word, so that's not relevant here.
Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, high blood pressure, stroke. The more we eliminate animal foods from our diet, the healthier we are.
So again, that doesn't explain, right? That doesn't explain France, which has more consumption of animal foods and especially dairy, saturated fat, than anywhere else in Europe, and also has some of the best health indicators. Last I checked, it was actually the best indicators in Europe. I think Spain may have overtaken it, but they're in the top 1 or 2 or 3 in terms of health indicators in Europe, and they also have some of the highest animal food consumption.
And again, it has to do with the fact that we are really designed to eat a strictly plant-based diet.
Yeah.
Again, complete nonsense. Like, there's no evidence for that.
Yeah, and I guess for the people that want to know how specifically we're designed anatomically to eat plants, you just have to look at our physiology, like the jaw.
Oh my goodness, this crap! This is really, really terrible. This is such nonsensical vegan propaganda that it's not even worth responding to. Yeah, anyone who takes this seriously, sorry, you're not a serious person.
Structure, the stomach acidity, the length of our intestine.
Stomach acidity of humans is more acidic than the stomach acidity of carnivores. So based on stomach acidity, we eat a hell of a lot of meat, right? And in fact, based on stomach acidity, we share a lot in common with scavengers. I know this video is going to mention scavengers at some point. So if you're just going on stomach acidity as an example, you would say humans are scavengers, right?
And stuff like that. What do you say, though, to the people that say that might be true, but the only reason we're here today is because we ate meat back in the day and we survived because of meat? What do you say to that?
It's not about survival. It's about thriving. We were able to overcome our physiological boundaries as hominids, as hominins, as primates, right? All of these categories, except for us, they have a certain proportionality, certain gut size to brain size. we were able to overcome that. Now, how did we overcome that? There are really only two theories that are worth talking about. One is that we started eating more animal products, especially fatty animal products, and the other is that we started cooking our food. Now, in order for the second one to have any validity, we would have humans would have had to have started using fire a couple of million years before the evidence for fire currently exists in the literature. In other words, this change in brain size started happening about 2.5 million years ago. The earliest and best evidence we have for humans being able to control fire, maybe 500,000 years ago, maybe a million at the very most. So you're talking about, and the evidence for fire would be pretty clear. Like, it would be pretty clear in the fossil records. So it's hard to make the case that cooking is what did it. So we're left, it's possible, I'm not ruling it out, but given the current weight of the evidence, it really is animal foods that allowed us to grow our brains into what they are. So it's not about survival, it's about thriving and optimizing and evolving into a new kind of creature that what didn't exist, is not that similar to the creatures before 2.5 million years ago in our ancestry.
Yeah, there are a number of people who have advanced these theories, and number one, none of the people putting forth those theories are physicians, and
that's relevant. How exactly? Who cares? I mean, to be honest, physicians don't study this stuff. Like, they actually shouldn't be putting forward these theories. They don't know what's going on. They haven't studied human evolution, right?
The reason I make that point is because if they understood what meat does to our health and to our physiology, they would.
What are you talking about? What meat does to our health and to our physiology? So again, the most long-lived populations on the planet, in every continent, according to a number of data sets, including the one I'll put on the screen right now, the most long-lived populations on the planet eat a lot of meat. In fact, the more meat a population eats, the healthier and longer lived they're likely to be. That's what all the data tell us.
Never make that argument. First of all, there is no way that Stone Age humans could possibly hunt efficiently enough to gather enough animal food to make that their primary means of gaining nutrition. Number
one. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, you're welcome to come to Crater National Park in Tanzania, and see, not very far from where I live here in South Africa, and check it out. There are animals everywhere. There are massive animals everywhere. We know humans were eating them. We know humans were killing elephants, as far away as California. That may be the case, but you're going to have to prove to me that it's the case. You can't just state it, right? You're going to have to show me some evidence.
One. Number two, people have come up with theories saying, oh, well, okay, yeah, it's clear that humans couldn't hunt well enough to...
Why couldn't humans hunt well enough? Humans we see today, humans living in hunter-gatherer sort of populations, cultures, they are by far the most efficient hunters in their ecosystems, right? They always come back with an animal. And that's in today's environment when we don't have those megafauna. When we had the megafauna were abundant 12,000 years ago, it's pretty clear hunting would have been much, much easier. So, yeah.
Collect enough meat to live off of. So human beings scavenge. Well, that's a ridiculous statement.
So human beings, prior to becoming human beings at some earlier point in time, I believe this common ancestor is around 4 million years ago. Might get that date slightly wrong. If I do, I'll correct it on the screen. We believe that they actually first learned how to eat more meat or animal products from scavenging. And I don't think that that's very much in doubt. It seems very likely that opening the parts of the animal that the herbivore couldn't get to, that the carnivore couldn't get to, so the brain, the bone marrow, and so on, these fatty, nutrient-dense animal parts, eating that at some earlier point, prior to humans being humans, some earlier point in our evolution, was a very, very key point in that evolution. That's what allowed us eventually to grow those big brains and so on, was a preference for those fatty animal foods, based on the current weight of the literature, the current weight of the evidence. There may be new theories that crop up that we haven't seen yet, but based on what we currently know, that's what we'd have to surmise.
Because it's clear that we do not have the physiology of a scavenger. I mean,
So again, the stomach acid would be one thing that we share in common with a lot of scavengers. So when you say it's clear, you got to give me some evidence. What exactly do you mean by that?
At least in America, every Thanksgiving, people get sick from eating poorly cooked turkey, and that's a turkey cooked in a $1,000.
So that's extrapolation from industrialized, processed foods. And first of all, I'm not even sure that that's correct. Let me look it up. A majority of food poisoning cases are related to plants, not animals. Among the animal foods that cause food poisoning, I think shellfish is probably towards the top, and sort of other maybe raw meats and raw animal products maybe number two or number three. So what he's saying, I'm not sure it's correct. I'll look it up and put it on the screen, um, but he's, it's not an apples to apples comparison. If an animal, if a human killed an elephant and was eating it for 7 days, that's very different to, a turkey was killed a month, or 6 months ago, was then frozen, and then you bought it in the store and you didn't cook it properly and you got sick. Those are two completely different situations.
Stainless steel range that has temperature control. There's no way people eating rotting flesh, burned in some fire, could possibly hope to sterilize that flesh well enough to prevent themselves from becoming ill. So
that's a hypothesis, and I would say, based on everything we know about modern hunter-gatherer communities, again, that's a hypothesis that we can falsify. Do modern hunter-gatherers communities get food poisoning? No, not that I've seen, right? At least I'm not aware of that literature.
Clearly are not scavengers. Furthermore, most large savanna predators don't leave enough tissue on their kills to scavenge. And
so that's again untrue. There are the bones. So if you think about something like, let's leave the elephants aside, things like kudus, things like bucks, what we call boks here in South Africa, antelope of different kind. They're pretty big. They can be pretty big, and you can have a lot of bones that the carnivore can't get into. And if the human can fight off whatever it is, hyenas and other things that are also interested in the bones, you also have the brain, right, under the skull. So there's actually is quite a lot of animal food, depending on the size of the animal that was killed, right?
There is food left. They guard those kills jealously and don't allow other animals, including humans, to actually come and try.
So there is evidence. In fact, maybe I can put a short video on the screen of humans. I believe this is a video of Maasai hunters scaring away lions to take a piece of the kill and then walk off, right? So humans are, what he's saying humans can't do, humans are doing that even today.
Try to scavenge from them. And then lastly, there really is no advantage in human beings eating large amounts of protein. There is no point to consuming huge amounts of protein because it's not healthy for us. Number one.
Who says it's not healthy for us? Like, what's the evidence for that?
The human brain is mostly fatty tissue. It burns pure glucose.
So that is probably, I don't know when this video was made. Maybe it was made old enough that he has an excuse of ignorance. But we now know that there's something called ketones, which can be derived from fats, which can cross the blood-brain barrier, and which is a good fuel for the brain. So the brain will always burn some glucose, but it doesn't burn pure glucose all the time, as he's implying. And of course, the liver produces enough glucose for your brain to function just fine, even if you don't eat any glucose.
Which comes from carbohydrate. Protein is not the preferred energy source for our...
Protein is never about energy, right? So fats are about energy, right? So yeah, I mean, what he's saying is technically true, but like, who cares? It's irrelevant.
Brain. So eating huge amounts of protein is not helpful for us because our bodies can't store protein. And so any protein that we take in over and...
Bodies can technically store, bodies are made up of protein, right? So there's things like muscle turnover and muscle synthesis, which are basically creating new protein stores, if you want to think about it that way.
Above what we use on a daily basis, which is approximately, say, 50 to 60 grams of protein on a given day, is converted into carbohydrate anyway.
Yeah, 50 to 60 grams. I would challenge, let me know how you're getting your 50 to 60 grams of protein in a day. I did a review on this channel of someone who said they were eating a high protein vegan diet, and they didn't. I don't think they hit. I think they did hit 50 grams, but they certainly didn't hit 60 grams. I don't think in that one. So, and that's when you're young. As you get older, your protein requirements will improve. So I'd be interested to see how he's hitting his 60, 70, 80 grams of protein a day that's needed.
And that process of converting that protein into carbohydrate is very energetically costly. It dehydrates us, and therefore it doesn't pay for us to try to eat huge amounts of protein because it saps too much energy, uses up too much water, and doesn't get us any physiologic benefit. So again,
the meat that humans would have been eating prior to about 12,000 years ago would have been very fatty meat. So we're talking in terms of calories, if you want to think about it in that term. It's not technically calories, but in terms of potential energy, chemical energy, you're getting much more fat than you are protein when you're having something like a mastodon or a mammoth or, a giant wombat or a giant beaver, right? Very fatty creatures.
It doesn't make sense that humans would have wasted a lot of energy looking for protein that doesn't
So again, they're not looking for protein, they're looking for fat.
help us. And there's a researcher out of UC Berkeley by the name of Milton who has this absurd theory that meat caused humans to develop large brains.
So her theory has been, again, I don't know when this was being made, but her theory is pretty much accepted by most paleoanthropologists at this point in time. Because again, there's two theories here: it's meat or it's cooking. And in order for it to be cooking, we'd have to have control of fire about 1 million years earlier than we think we had control of fire, which is possible, but as yet there's no evidence for that.
Number one, it's an illogical argument. It makes no sense whatsoever for the reasons that I just outlined.
No, because you don't understand that the animals that we would have been hunting are mostly fat, not mostly protein. So the reasons that you just outlined are completely meaningless because you don't understand the argument, right?
And there's nothing about meat that in any way stimulates brain development. And if, in fact, eating meat or hunting stimulated brain development, then the carnivores would have the biggest brains of all animals.
So this is again like weird extrapolation. So humans are not cats. We are not dogs. Those creatures have their own evolutionary trajectory, right? Our evolutionary trajectory is completely different, right? Coming up through proto monkeys and whatever it may be, primates and hominins and so on. So comparing us with cats and dogs is pretty meaningless. And the brain thing may have to do with humans had very complicated hunting strategies, and also humans were fighting with one another for territory and so on. So the larger brain clearly played some evolutionary role. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had it. This is basically Darwinism 101.
They don't. And which is why if you have a dog, he still drinks from the toilet. They're not very bright. So yeah, there's nothing about me.
So again, talking about dogs tells us nothing about humans. Actually, you can talk about dogs to learn about humans, but that's more about domestication and diets and so on, because dogs are such a domesticated animal that we can learn the diets that they thrive on. Very likely the humans are going to thrive on the same diets and so on. So there are things we can learn from looking at dogs, but nothing about brain size.
That in any way is important for brain development or brain function. In fact, in terms of the intelligence, it requires much more intelligence to learn how to exploit plant-based resources in an environment.
So by his same example, right, using the same methodology. So what he's done, he's compared human brain size to another carnivore size. Let's compare human brain size to an herbivore size, a sheep size or a cow size. See what that looks like.
Number one, you have to be able to recognize, wait a minute, these plants over here are flowering. That means that in approximately 90 days, these plants are going to be fruiting. So I have to, one, remember where these plants are in the environment. I have to be able to tell time so I can come back and then collect these fruits when they're available, and then take these fruits and cache them so that I will have a source of food that's going to last me for a period of time. And not only that.
So when we look at traditional human populations, hunter-gatherer populations, that is not how they treat fruits. They don't store fruits for more than a day or so. Same like meat. I mean, they don't store meat for very long either, right? So what he's saying is mostly nonsensical. I mean, not even other herbivorous animals do what he's describing. like, if you see a baboon coming across a tree of ripening fruit, they eat the whole thing at one time. Like they eat everything. They don't leave anything for anyone else. Make sense? Or save for themselves for another day.
Once you recognize that dynamic, that a flower ultimately leads to fruit, you can then apply that to not just say an apple tree or a peach tree. You can recognize the flower on a squash plant. Say, oh goodness, I can come back and look for something to eat in a month or two from this plant.
So the squash stuff is interesting, right? Because there's some data showing that humans never traditionally ate squash prior to about 12,000 years ago. And the reason that they may have introduced squash into their diet is not because of human behavior, it's because of elephant behavior. They saw that elephants were using squash as a food source, and then they tried to breed and cultivate it so that it could become a food source in, I believe, South America. It may have been North America. It may have been both. But so the interesting thing is everything that he's saying. I think there's some elements of truth there, but mostly humans learned how to cultivate plant foods. This we can tell from the fossil record. Mostly we learned how to cultivate plant foods by looking at herbivores, not by being herbivores.
And that will then allow you to exploit a much wider range of food throughout your environment than just being, held to just this tree or that tree or this food source or that food source. And again,
so most of the trees, most of the things in nature, if humans eat them, you're going to get pretty sick, right? Including fruits. I mean, fruits are there for a specific animal, usually a specific bird. If you eat the wrong fruit, you're not going to be doing well, right?
That requires a much greater intellectual ability to make those kinds of connections and to be able to exploit those sort of food resources.
Maybe, but who cares? How's that relevant?
Just throughout your environment than just trying to chase something and kill it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because from what you just said, it's made me realize like the reason plants are so colorful, for example, fruit and veg, is so bright to the human eye is because humans are natural herbivores. We're designed to eat these foods. I'm just wondering whether
humans have a common ancestor with natural herbivores, or mostly herbivorous primates. That much is true.
There's any other evidence like this that clearly shows we're natural herbivores?
If you think about plants, the edible plant parts are hand-sized objects that are smooth-edged, bright.
Dude, come out with me in the forest here in Southern Africa, not far from where humans evolved, and try and eat plants. Like, just try. Try for a day. You're not going to be able to do it unless you have a huge amount of expertise. And even then, you're not going to be able to get enough calories to do it in the longer term. So I think this is complete speculative nonsense at this point.
Lightly colored, and they're small enough to be held in the hand, and of course they smell and taste like plants. So what do we do to animal tissue to make it acceptable to us? We take it, we skin it, we cut it into these smooth-edged, hand-sized objects. We then take the blood out of it, we cook it so that instead of being wet and slimy, it's now firm.
Yeah, so again, you cannot draw conclusions from what he thinks humans do. There are plenty of humans who eat raw meat today. There's certain humans, like even myself, I only use salt on on my meat before I cook it or whatever it may be. So you're setting up a straw man. You're saying this is how meat eating behavior in humans looks like. This is what it looks like. Therefore, and they put lots of plants and they cook it to a powder or whatever it is. Therefore, we're supposed to eat plants. You can't do that. You have to actually look at really existing human behaviors and then criticize those. You can't just make up behaviors and then criticize them.
Plant tissues, but most importantly, we cover it with all of these plant products to try and make it taste like plants, which is what our brain really wants. So
again, complete nonsense. Like, I would challenge anyone to go out, maybe don't have raw stuff because food poisoning concerns and so on, but take a piece of liver, take a piece of beef liver, cook it very rare, we can call it. So, sizzle it a little bit on a high heat, sizzle it till it becomes brown on both sides, but still very, very rare in the center. Eat that, just try a little piece of it. It is much, much, much tastier than an overcooked piece of liver, right? So again, what he's saying is, you could say this. I'm sure he has, as a vegan doctor, I'm sure he hasn't eaten meat in years, and maybe he forgets these things. But meat, at least rare meat, is very tasty in certain contexts, right?
We really don't want the animal tissue, because if we did, we eat it the way the carnivores do: wet, slimy, bloody, and rotting. No, we take it and try to make it.
So the evidence is not that humans are like carnivores, like lions. The evidence is that humans are a weird kind of scavenger that basically we scavenge our own meat at this point in time. So now I'm not talking about, there's a paper on Neanderthals, if I can find it. It's a hard to find paper, but I think I have it saved somewhere, which shows that Neanderthals were eating a hell of a lot of meat and that they were also dry aging it, basically, what we would today call dry aging. And therefore they were able to consume more because the mass would become less, right? You have to actually go into the theory and understand some of the historical evidence for these things before you can make sweeping statements about this is what humans do.
It look and taste and smell like plants in order to make it acceptable.
Further, I disagree. I mean, that's not how I eat my meat. And so I maybe if I eat any plants, maybe I put lots of meat juice on those plants to make it smell like meat, right? So it might be the opposite for me. And again, the way you're saying it is, if I can show you an example of one human who doesn't do what you're saying, you're wrong. And I'm the one human who doesn't do what you're saying, right? So you're wrong.
Furthermore, the fact that we actually cover ourselves with the scents of plants to make ourselves more attractive tells us that plants have always been important throughout our existence as a species.
Does it? How long has that behavior been going on? How long have people been using perfumes? This guy's just making stuff up at this point.
And the reason we like to smell like plants is because that is a subtle signal to our brain that we have been ingesting the compounds that actually make us healthier, make us live longer, and make us more resistant to disease.
That's a hypothesis. What evidence do you have for it?
Yeah, that makes that. I guess it makes a lot of sense. And
it makes sense if you're an idiot, I suppose. I mean, like, it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, what are you saying? You're saying that humans in prehistory, 2 million years ago, were applying rose oil? I mean, is that what you're saying?
I'm sure, like most people would agree. Some people, though, the naysayers and the critics would say, "What about B12, though? How do you respond to that?"
yeah. It's like, okay, we're going.
It's not just B12. There's a number of vitamins that you're not going to be able to get in a very bioavailable form on a plant-based diet. And this is so thoroughly documented that there's nothing to say about it at this point in time.
Ignore all the heart disease, all the cancer, all the diabetes.
No, we're not ignoring any of those things, because when you eat more meat, those things also go away, right? Remember Hong Kong. Remember all the data that we have.
And all of that. We're just going to talk about B12. Well, okay, let's talk about B12. All B12 is made by bacteria. That no animal makes B12, no plant makes B12. And when human beings were living in more natural settings, we got B12 all the time from the dirt.
Complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. There's zero evidence for this. What would evidence for this look like? You would have to show me a population that you can prove was completely plant-based, number one. There's no such population in history, right? Or in prehistory. Number two, you'd have to have, I don't know, soil samples of B12 concentrations that are like 1,000 times the B12 concentration in soil samples today. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
From water sources, from, many things in our environment. But where do we live now? We live in these concrete and steel jungles that we've invented for ourselves. So we've eliminated the natural sources of B12.
Okay, that was painful. What to say about this? Look, I mean, I think, so this guy has another video that's very long. I didn't want to make a reaction to that because it's just so long, but maybe it's worth making a reaction, because this pop paleoanthropology stuff, like, he's not even doing paleoanthropology of any kind. He's just making statements like, cats look like this, therefore we can't be cats. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. And the fact that some people are taken in by this, I should have mentioned at the beginning, the reason I did this is that someone in a comment thread asked me to look at one of this guy's videos. And it's just so prima facie ridiculous that it's very hard for me to take seriously. And it's very hard for me to take seriously anyone who's quoting this guy as an authority. So anyway, some food for thought. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.